Good evening. How can I help?
Look, we have a talking car.
Welcome to Screen Recaps, and today we are going to recapping the movie Monolith. The movie starts with a commercial for a high-tech car company called Monolith. In the ad, they say their car is the safest in the world and has lots of special safety features. They talk about things like unbreakable windows, strong tires, a tough body, and more to keep people safe from theft and accidents. You can control all these features using a smartphone app connected to the car's computer. There's also a virtual helper named Lilith to help you use the car's touchscreen. In the next part of the movie, we see a mom taking her young son David in the same high-tech car to visit his grandma. We find out from Lilith that the mom's name is Sandra, and her husband Carl couldn't come along because he's a busy pilot. The car is so smart that it can even tell how heavy the people inside it are. Later, Carl gives them a call from the main airport after finishing his work, expressing how much he misses them. Just then, there's a knock at the door, and Carl says goodbye and leaves. Meanwhile, little David starts getting fussy, so Sandra hands him her smartphone to keep him occupied. After a while, Sandra makes a stop at a gas station by the roadside. She takes David into the restroom to change his diapers, while a group of girls can be heard giggling nearby. The gas station also has a store, so Sandra buys some of David's favorite snacks. While she's at the checkout counter, she notices someone trying to break into her car outside. Instead of panicking, she calmly takes out her smartphone and locks the car using the smart app. As Sandra is occupied dealing with this situation, she doesn't realize that David has wandered away from her. When she finally notices that David is missing, she lets out a scream and frantically searches for him throughout the store. She rushes outside and even approaches a stranger, thinking that David might be with them. She appears to be extremely anxious until she spots David with the same three ladies she encountered earlier in the restroom. Sandra swiftly places David in her car and activates the vault mode feature. This disconnects her from what's happening outside, and she finally exhales in relief. After departing from the gas station, Sandra still has a long way to go before they reach her mother-in-law's house. With the extended drive ahead, Sandra feels bored and decides to call her childhood friend, Jessa, to catch up. Jessa answers the call and tells her she's near the Central Airport, staying at a hotel. She even admits to being with Carl. Sandra is devastated by this revelation of her friend having an affair with her husband. She becomes so upset that she doesn't even bother entering her mother-in-law's house when they arrive. She continues calling Carl, but he doesn't answer and pretends to be occupied. Tired of the lies, Sandra decides to take matters into her own hands and sets off on a journey to find Carl at the Central Airport in Los Angeles. Along the way, a sign indicates that Los Angeles is about 320 miles away. After a while, Lilith, the smart AI, informs her that a serious accident has occurred on the main highway, which will slow down their progress. Then, Lilith suggests that Sandra take the bypass road. As the journey continues, darkness descends. The thick fog further worsens her visibility of the road ahead. During the drive, there are no signs of human settlements or other vehicles. However, she comes across an electrical substation situated in the middle of nowhere. The area is so desolate that the only inhabitants seem to be wild animals. Suddenly, a nervous Sandra loses her concentration and collides with a deer attempting to cross the road. The collision causes David to start crying, and as usual, Sandra hands him her smartphone to soothe him. She then promptly exits the car to check on the injured animal, which is wedged beneath the front of her car. Because of this, Sandra is unable to move her car forward. Meanwhile, as David plays with the cell phone, he accidentally opens the AI car app. His little fingers wander over the app, and unbeknownst to Sandra, he activates the vault feature of the car. Sandra grasps the seriousness of the situation and frantically attempts to open the door, but it's already too late. She's locked outside the car, desperately trying to get the 2-year-old David to turn off the vault mode, but he doesn't comprehend her words and continues playing with the phone. Soon, Sandra panics and starts shouting at the toddler, startling him. He drops the smartphone under his seat. Even when she tries to break the glass with a rock, not a single scratch appears on the window glass. Frustrated by her futile efforts, Sandra decides to explore other options. She begins retracing her steps toward the electrical substation she had noticed earlier. After a considerable walk, she reaches the station, leaps over the fence, and calls out for help. Unfortunately, there's no response. Inside one of the rooms, Sandra discovers some essential items. She grabs a flashlight for nighttime visibility and a hefty wrench to aid in breaking the car's locked glass. As she exits the substation, she spots a wild animal tailing her. Sandra hastily retreats, but a coyote suddenly launches an attack. She clambers onto the car's roof in an attempt to escape. Despite her efforts to frighten it away, the coyote remains unfazed. In a last-ditch effort, Sandra starts banging the car with the wrench, triggering an alarm that finally prompts the coyote to retreat. It's then that she notices David struggling to breathe. Despite the dire situation, she manages to comfort him, and he eventually regains his breath and falls asleep. After some contemplation, Sandra herself becomes weary and dozes off on the car's hood. The following day, she awakens to the bright morning sun. Sandra rushes to check on David's condition inside the car and finds her baby weak and feeble due to hunger and dehydration. One of the car's features also displays the slowly rising outdoor temperature, adding to Sandra's concern. The isolation of their location, with no humans in sight, becomes a daunting reality. Faced with no other option, Sandra makes the difficult decision to seek help and sets out on foot, despite her severe dehydration. Along the way, she encounters a river, where she quenches her thirst and cleans herself. As she progresses, she encounters steep hills along her path, adding to her physical challenges. After covering several miles, Sandra finally stumbles upon an old airfield and spots a jet. Meanwhile, the temperature inside the monolith car continues to rise, prompting the emergency cooling fan to kick in. Upon reaching the abandoned jet, Sandra enters and discovers a stash of alcoholic drinks, a gallon of gasoline, a lighter, and a pair of spare airplane tires. She consumes some alcohol for immediate energy and quickly gathers the essential items she will need. Following this, Sandra utilizes the gasoline to set fire to the 2 tires in a bid to attract help. She then takes the gallon and fills it with water from the river. Slowly and with determination, Sandra retraces her steps to the spot where she left David. In the subsequent scene, Sandra rushes to the car and discovers David in a weakened state, his complexion turning red. She desperately calls out to him, but David doesn't respond or move. The temperature inside the car has risen dramatically, rendering the emergency cooling fans ineffective. Faced with her son's dire condition, Sandra quickly climbs onto the roof and pours the river water she brought. But her efforts prove futile. With the realization that her child may perish inside the high-tech vehicle, Sandra resumes her attempts to break the car window with the wrench, though it only drains her energy. Later, in a last-ditch effort, Sandra tries to start a fire outside the car, hoping the sensors would detect the smoke and open the windows. Unfortunately, this plan fails, and instead, the emergency cooling fans cease functioning to prevent the smoke from entering. Exhausted, Sandra collapses to the ground and has a vision of herself and Carl visiting the accident scene a year later. There, in her dream, Sandra realizes her mistakes and continues to blame Carl for David's death. After some time, she awakens to a noise and discovers that it was all just a dream. To make matters worse, the same coyote from the previous night reappears in front of her. Sandra decides to hide from it and attempts to climb onto the car's roof. However, due to the extremely high temperature inside the car, she can't stay there and instead slides beneath the vehicle. It's here that the coyote bites her leg. It dawns on Sandra that the coyote is after the deer. As the coyote drags the deer away, the car starts rolling backward. Sandra quickly gets out from under the car and tries to stop it from sliding backward. Despite her best efforts, the car continues to roll, inching closer to a precipice. However, a small chunk of rock obstructs the car, finally bringing it to a halt. As Sandra gazes from the cliff's edge, she recalls a cartoon she saw earlier at the gas station where a diamond was obtained after a safe was broken into. This sparks an idea, and she considers pushing the car down the slope to unlock the doors. Sandra is acutely aware that her plan carries risks, but she finds herself with no other alternatives and decides to proceed. With the wrench in hand, she begins breaking the rock that obstructs the tire. After successfully removing the obstacle, Sandra deliberately pushes the car off the cliff with David still inside. As the car is airborne, its built-in AI springs into action, detecting the fall from a height. The car's features work to shift its balance, analyzing gravitational forces to ensure it lands upright without causing harm to David. Since the car was designed to deactivate the vault mode during an accident to allow rescuers to access it, the doors finally open. Upon impact with the ground, Sandra descends the cliff and approaches the car. Finding the once locked door open, Sandra quickly retrieves David from the car and begins to cool him down by loosening his clothes. Seeing David's frail condition, Sandra is determined to leave the area as quickly as possible. Before Sandra gets into the car to drive, the entire system undergoes a restart. With Lilith's assistance, Sandra activates the car's extreme off-road mode and begins ascending the cliff in front of her. The car proves to be well equipped for extremely challenging conditions and easily conquers the steep incline. In a miraculous turn of events, Sandra successfully reaches the off-road path she selected and heads towards the hospital. In the movie's final scene, we find Sandra and David at the hospital. David lies in a hospital bed beside Sandra, connected to multiple tubes. Sandra appears anxious about David until he